In 1990, nearly 4 out of every 10 people on Earth lived in extreme poverty. Today, that number is less than 1 in 10. For decades, global destitution collapsed at a staggering speed. At the peak of this trend, roughly 115,000 people were climbing out of extreme poverty every single day. In 1990, an individual in the poorest global decile had to work nearly half a day just to earn the equivalent of $1. By 2024, that labor time had dropped to about 5 hours. This chart tracks the population living below the extreme poverty baseline of $2.15 a day. Watch the total number plummet from 2.3 billion down to an estimated 831 million over 3.5 decades. Progress was geographically uneven, driven primarily by rapid industrialization in East and South Asia, specifically the massive economic catch-up growth in China and India. This localized Asian economic miracle created a dangerous global illusion, the false assumption that lineal, inevitable progress would naturally lift the rest of global poverty over the line. Then, between 2013 and 2015, the numbers stopped cooperating. The reliable, steep downward curve of global poverty reduction abruptly flattened out. The COVID-19 pandemic shattered whatever momentum was left. The economic shockwaves from global lockdowns erased years of hard-won progress almost overnight, pushing approximately 100 million people back under the extreme poverty threshold. We are now trapped in what economists call a polycrisis. This is a scenario where multiple compounding shocks, the economic scars of the pandemic, severe weather events from climate change, and sluggish baseline economic growth, all hit the global system at exactly the same time. The traditional playbook of relying on factory exports to lift nations out of destitution is stalling out. The remaining 8.5% of the global population still living in extreme poverty are now trapped in a new, highly resistant paradigm. Extreme poverty has migrated. It is now hyper-concentrated geographically, primarily pooling into sub-Saharan Africa. The vast majority of people trying to survive on less than $2.15 a day now live in what institutions call fragile and conflict-affected situations, or FCS. FCS are states actively destabilized by war, fractured institutions, or collapsed governance. You can't fix a collapsed state simply by opening up trade routes. Modern extreme poverty is a structural symptom of state failure, requiring an entirely different type of intervention. That brings us to the World Bank Group, the premier multilateral institution tasked with navigating this stalled global agenda. Founded in 1944 to finance the reconstruction of a war-torn Europe, the bank eventually pivoted. Other leaders like Robert McNamara in the 1970s, it adopted an aggressive mandate to eliminate absolute poverty in the developing world. To do this, the World Bank operates through distinct financial arms. The IBRD, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, provides traditional loans and policy advice to middle-income nations. Meanwhile, the IDA, the International Development Association, acts as a lifeline for the absolute poorest countries, deploying zero-interest loans and fiscal grants. Historically, the bank relied heavily on investment project financing, which simply meant paying for physical assets like dams, schools, or roads. But building a school doesn't matter if the local government can't manage the education system. So the bank shifted toward a mechanism called Program for Results, or P4R. In the bank's matrix, Program for Results sits under financial instruments. P4R disperses funds only after achieving verified metrics, forcing governments to upgrade domestic systems. At the chart's base, this financial leverage pairs with advisory knowledge to leave a functional system long after funding runs out. The World Bank's strategy has shifted. It now operates as an entity that engineers functional, resilient governments to maintain long-term institutional stability. Faced with an increasingly fractured world, the bank introduced its controversial evolution roadmap. It expanded its core mission statement to include ending extreme poverty on a livable planet. This shift prioritizes financing global public goods, or GPGs. GPGs are broad, cross-border initiatives like carbon mitigation or pandemic preparedness. This has sparked fierce debate over whether the bank should focus on these global systemic threats or stick to localized development in low-income countries. Critics fear a severe math problem. Concessional capital, the pool of low-interest money meant to keep sub-Saharan African economies afloat, is limited. There is a real concern that these crucial poverty reduction funds will be diverted to fund green energy transitions in wealthier nations. Complicating this internal debate is external pressure. African nations are increasingly turning to entities like China for rapid, infrastructure-heavy capital. These alternative funding sources often bypass the strict governance conditions attached to Western multilateral loans. The World Bank is now mathematically stretched beyond its limits. It is being asked to absorb global climate shocks and eradicate localized extreme poverty from the same shrinking pool of ODA. ODA, or Official Development Assistance, is the government-funded aid used to promote economic development in the world's poorest nations. This chart of global poverty projections reveals a grim reality. The UN's Sustainable Development Goal aimed to push extreme poverty below 3%, represented by this dotted black line, by 2030. But under current macroeconomic models, the trajectory lines flatten out long before reaching that goal. A primary barrier to progress is debt overhang. Developing nations are currently paralyzed by heavy sovereign debt. Many are spending more money on debt servicing than they receive in total aid. Leading economists like Lauren Summers warn that without a massive recapitalization of the Multilateral Development Bank System, or MDBs, hundreds of millions will remain permanently locked out of the global economy. MDBs are international financial institutions chartered by groups of countries to encourage economic development. The era of easy, export-driven economic catch-up is over. To eliminate the final fraction of global destitution, the international community must execute a radical, politically difficult restructuring of both global sovereign debt and international climate finance.